Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Today we're working on the mountain bike. Last time I rode it, the brakes were a little hit or miss. Um, Basically, they would sometimes work and sometimes go to the lever. So I've got a big old air bubble that I got to chase out. So we're going to bleed some brakes. So I did do a quick little top end bleed on this. And I know that the fluid inside there is pretty nasty. So we're definitely going to be doing a full flush. And this procedure is going to be basically what I do for Shimano brakes. So somewhere I have about, half a dozen Shimano bleed cups, but couldn't find any of them. So ordered this guy off the Amazons. This is a cheap Chinese no-name bleed kit. We need about half of what's in here, mostly the cup and the syringe. You can bleed the brakes entirely just using the cup and a piece of tubing and gravity bleed it, but I'm going to show you the way I like to do it, which is kind of a mix of what Shimano says to do, and it works really well for me. We're also going to need our fluid. I'm not going to trust that. I have a decent amount left in my bottle, and if you are going to be doing any amount of bleeding, I recommend getting the big bottle because it costs twice as much and is like 10 times as much fluid, so better value there. You're also going to need a small Allen wrench, either a 2, 2.5, or 3 mil, depending on what your brakes are. Then a standard 3-way Y wrench to get the wheel off. You're also going to need a pad spreader. If you don't have a pad spreader, you can gingerly push the pistons back in with a plastic tire lever, but the pad spreader really helps, as well as 7 mil open end wrench, as well as alcohol and clean towels. So let's get started. I'm going to show you on the front because it's nice and easy, and I'll probably do the rear off screen. Our first step is going to be to pull the wheels off. So with the SRAM, you can just push that and hit the button. Shimano's, you've got a lever, and if you have an old bike that doesn't have clutch, then you have an old bike that doesn't have clutch. So you don't have to worry about that. Got kind of quick QR style on the rear of this bike, and I know the front I need the Allen wrench. But take our wheels off and stick them aside. All right, hopefully we're focused on here. We are going to take our pad spreader and very gingerly spread those pads open. The higher end Shimano, so like SLX and above, use a ceramic piston, and if you tweak it the wrong way, you will shatter it and ruin your brakes. Then you need to buy a new caliper. Then next step is going to be to pull that pad axle, and wouldn't you know it, that takes a 3 mil. So let me go get some Allen wrenches. All right, so you are going to want to add a 3, definitely use a 3 mil on your kit. Totally forgot about that. So we're going to pull that out. Now that our pistons are spread, and I like to keep this kind of as an assembly, that way you don't lose anything. And we're going to stick that on the bench. Now we're going to see what actually came in this kit. And see if it's actually useful. So we've got our syringe. We've got some really cheap gloves. I guess if you need gloves, you can go for it. We've got our bleed cup, which actually has a nice little metal grommet to it, so I kind of like that. We've got our bleed cup holder. Does it? Oh, it does. Shimano's let you flip it, hold it in like this, so that's nice. We have our plunger for the bleed cup. That way we can remove it without having any residue around dripping everywhere. We have a free O-ring, some rubber bands, which are useful for bleeding weird old Avid stuff. Not really Shimano, but go for it. A little catch bottle, that's cute. That helps sometimes. And then we've got our syringe and a length of tubing. And we do have the little holder guy, which is nice. So this comes in fairly critical. We also have a bleed block. That's a SRAM bleed block. That's not a Shimano bleed block. This works for like most two-piston SRAM brakes. Not technically correct, but it takes up space, so I think we should be able to use it. I've used these in a pinch, and if we have to, we'll take a rubber band and hold it in place. Again, I have like a million Shimano bleed blocks, no idea where they are. So what we're mostly going to need is just this bleed cup, this syringe, and this bleed block. Sorry for the focus, it doesn't want to comply, but I'm going to stick our bleed block in there, and actually that's staying pretty good, so we're fine there. I can give that brake a squeeze and it's not going anywhere. Now we're going to take our brake lever and switch it to a more horizontal orientation. I like to keep the clamp just a little bit tight so I can wiggle it around, but it stays in put. You may also need to dig out the Allen socket with a pick if it's had some dirt get in there, because mountain bike. And we'll remove the bleed port. Make sure you keep the O-ring. Sometimes the O-ring will get stuck down in there, so make sure you don't lose that, or the bleed's not going to hold very long. Now we're going to take our funnel, and we're going to draw up a little bit of oil on our syringe. So take our syringe, it's nice and full. Take our dust cover off of our caliper. I like to stick the box end side on. Crack it first just to make sure it's good. Then we're going to stick our syringe on like so. And then, all right, I want the other hole. Stick our syringe on like so. And then the little plastic guy helps as a holder to lock it in place. Then what I'll do is I usually crack it, draw up just a little bit to get those bubbles out, and then we're going to push. And then as we're pushing, we're going to watch the funnel, and you'll see I don't know if you can see that, but we've got some very gross black fluid coming out, which definitely tells me these brakes needed to bleed. I actually put this bike together kind of secondhand, and it had the brakes on it, and I have never bothered to bleed them myself, so this is the first time I've bled them. Granted, I've only got maybe a handful of rides on this, so not the end of the world. But now I'm getting to the end of my syringe, and we are going to pull that off so you can see. You can see just how black that is. I'm going to dump this, and then we're going to repeat. Okay, so flush that a few times. We've got a little bit more. It's starting to come out pink up top. So now is about the time where I go to my next step. What we're going to do is we're going to treat this sort of like it's a car. So I'm going to squeeze the brake lever and I'm going to crack the bleeder to open it and then close it just before this guy hits to the grip. I'm going to do that a few times until I'm happy that there's no, and satisfied that there's no bubbles coming out of the caliper. So let's go. Now normally what you'll do is have a catch bottle to do that, and so Shimano recommends disconnecting the syringe and adding a catch bottle, but you don't really need that. You can just leave the syringe on and then the syringe will it'll take up the slack. The catch bottle is really only needed if you're going to gravity bleed. Okay, now that I'm satisfied, I haven't seen any bubbles come out of there, so we're pretty good. We're actually done down here, so I can remove the syringe. We can make sure that's nice and snug and clean it a bit, put our cap on. Now that brings us to our final step, which is top end bleeding. So top end bleeding is the last thing you would do when you're bleeding a brake, and also if you just have a little bit of air trapped in the lever that kind of comes and goes, this is a good way to get that out. So if you need to do a full flush, you do everything I did before. If you just have a little bit and you need to keep yourself going between bleeds, top end bleed is really where it's at. So what we're going to do is we're going to squeeze the brake lever. Obviously with the bleed block still in, everything closed up down there. We're going to squeeze our brake lever and look into it. It's a little high for me right now, but look into it and we'll see some bubbles come up. Then, once they're not coming up anymore, we're going to tip it about 30 degrees down. And we are going to keep squeezing again until no bubbles come out. Then we're going to tip it 30 degrees up. Once again, squeeze it until there's no bubbles. Now what we're going to do is basically just do that in circles. So basically flat, down, and then either flat or up again. Doesn't really matter. As long as we keep fluid in the cup, we're good. So if you're just doing this from just starting, always make sure you at least have at least a quarter of the cup full. Because the last thing you want to do is have it angled up, have an air pocket, and then be able to just basically suck air in when you're squeezing this. And the other thing is make sure you're doing smooth, slow, controlled squeezing. If you squeeze it really fast, what you'll do is just break up the bubbles and make them a lot harder to get rid of. So nice, smooth, gentle squeezing until you're satisfied. Now, I haven't seen any bubbles since the second time I squeezed it, so I've been good for a while, but I figure I'd illustrate doing it a few more times. So I'm going to bring it back to horizontal. We're going to stick our plug in the bleed cup. And if there's any bubbles still remaining on this little bit of fluid on the top, you basically just take your finger and swipe them away. We were good right there, but again, figure I'd show you what to do just in case. We reinstall our cap, put the lever back to its spot, and tighten it up. Oh, one more thing. that I just remembered. Free stroke screw. This guy is a little bit kind of weird. Some people don't always understand what it does. Basically, this just allows the piston to, in the master, to go back a little bit further, which opens up the pads just a little bit. So it's good for if you have a really big rotor and you, if you've got a big rotor and you've got some rub you don't like. So when you're bleeding it, however, you need to make sure that that screw is all the way in. You don't want to crank it down, just make it come to a stop. Then, if you had it out, you can turn it back out to where you had it. So if it was out, count the turns. If not, it was in all the way. Most people don't ever touch this, so you're probably fine. Anywho, now, next step is going to be we're going to clean up the caliper and throw our pads back in, throw the wheel on, and we're good to go. So we'll pull our bleed block out and spritz it with some alcohol. Make sure we don't have any brake fluid residue anywhere that it'll get on the pads, because you'll basically just have a bad day if that happens. All right, now that the wheels are on, we're going to squeeze the brakes a couple times. What that'll do is reset the pads back to where they were, so that we actually have, because we press them apart, we need them to come back in and auto adjust. And there we go. And if you're lucky, they won't rub. I'm not lucky because the front's rubbing. All right, I'm half lucky. The front's rubbing, the rear isn't. So now I just need to go adjust the front brake. But if you're looking at bleeding your brakes, you probably already know how to do that. All right, that's all for now. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. And if you want to see more bike stuff mixed in with the car stuff, let me know in the comments.